If you once poured your whole heart into a project, only to be pushed aside without a single word of credit, what would you do? Some would speak out, file lawsuits, do everything they could to reclaim justice. But the woman in today's story, she chose silence. No protests, no media. She simply walked away, stepped out of the very company she helped build from the first blueprint. Her name was erased from the records. The formula she created now bears someone else's name, but she didn't disappear. And that quiet journey led to a powerful upheaval. Not in a boardroom, but in the hearts and memories of those who, like her, were once overlooked. The headquarters of Aperture Core stood tall in the heart of Austin, Texas, like a fortress of light in the middle of a booming tech city. The 27th floor, home to the AI strategy room, was the heart of the entire corporation, and also where everything was falling apart. 3 days, 20 leading experts, over $500 million riding on a new artificial intelligence system called Prometheus 9, heralded as the breakthrough that would shape the future of finance, if it worked. But right now it didn't. It was frozen. And inside that icy glass room, everyone knew they were witnessing a silent catastrophe taking form by the hour. CEO Cole Maddox stood at the head of the table, tall, short-cropped salt and pepper hair, an unreadable face. He didn't need to yell. His silence alone held the entire room breathless. His eyes locked on the giant touchscreen behind the experts, where error codes flashed like an open wound. In his tailored gray suit and neatly tied black tie, he looked like an extension of the very system he ran, precise, cold, and unforgiving. The people around the table, from MIT, Stanford, ETH, Zurich, looked like they hadn't slept in days. Ties askew, collars damp with sweat, sunken eyes behind weary glasses. At the center sat Aidan Voss, head of the AI team, once dubbed Aperture's Golden Boy. Sharp, confident, but today his face was pale. His hands rested on the table, not shaking anymore, but numb with despair. Cole folded his arms. His voice rang out, steady as metal tapping reinforced glass. 36 hours, 14 patches, 13 model reloads, 8 matrix weight adjustments. He paused. "And this is what you bring me?" His eyes swept over each person like a blade gliding over throats. A system that can't run more than 43 seconds without crashing. A structural flaw so basic a second-year undergrad could spot it. No one spoke. No one dared. Cole's gaze pinned the very air still. Aidan rose slowly. "We've gone through every line of code. The issue might lie in the deep recursive layer. We need more time to—" Cole cut in. "We've burned over $40 million on high-speed analysis packages. I don't pay for words like might, maybe, or let's see. I want results, now." He checked his watch. "We have 3 days before the contract with Citadel Labs expires. If Prometheus isn't operational, we don't just lose $500 million, we lose our entire strategic data network." The conference room door opened. A young assistant stepped in, eyes brimming with panic, and handed Cole a fresh report. He glanced at it briefly, then dropped the paper on the table without a word. The slap of the page hitting the surface sounded like the death knell of their last hope.
"I'm gone for 10 minutes. When I return, I want a concrete roadmap. If there isn't one—" Cole didn't finish the sentence. He turned and walked out, leaving behind a room packed with people but so void of sound it ached. Outside the frosted glass, a long carpeted hallway stretched toward the technical wing. Beneath dim fluorescent lights, a janitorial cart rolled slowly along. On it, a water bucket, rags, and a damp mop. Pushing it was Janelle Reed, dressed in a faded blue uniform, rubber gloves on her hands, hair tied in a bun, worn canvas shoes squeaking lightly on the tile. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew she was invisible here. But as she passed the conference room, its LED light still burning, the whiteboard filled with tangled code like a spider's web, Janelle glanced over. Just for a second. But it was enough to stop her cold. She halted the cart, pretending to dip a rag into the bucket. But her eyes stayed fixed on the bottom right corner of the board. A linear model multiplied by the input navigation matrix. But no, that didn't make sense. A variable had been miscast. The programmer had treated it as a linear function, but it was clearly a non-linear input. Janelle held her breath. Her pulse quickened. Her hand clenched the rag. She stepped back half a pace, as if afraid her body might move beyond its bounds. Then she shook her head and pushed the cart forward. "Not my job," she whispered. "Not my place." Her eyes locked on the supply closet at the end of the hall, but her mind lingered in that glass room where an entire empire waited on a miracle. Janelle Reed was a single mother. She worked night shifts at Aperture to support her son Micah, who was in second grade. Every evening, she left Micah with a kind elderly neighbor and took the number 8 bus to the building where no one knew her name. No one remembered her face, but they all passed her daily. She didn't blame them. It had been 7 years since she last set foot in a lab. 7 years since she left her PhD program after an accident claimed the life of her husband, her only colleague, and her only partner. Since then, Janelle had folded her life into a thin blanket, just enough to block the rain, never dreaming of sunlight. But now, that blanket had shifted. That fleeting glance, at an error 20 experts hadn't caught, was tapping on her memory, on that part of her brain that used to solve hundreds of machine learning problems with a single furrow of her brow. She didn't want it to wake, but it already had. One floor above, Cole Maddox stood silently at a window, hands clasped behind his back. His assistant asked, "Do you want to call in the experts from Palo Alto?" He didn't answer. In his mind, he saw the image of a black woman, dressed in a worn janitor's uniform, walking out of the conference room. Her stride was brisk, her eyes razor sharp. That look did not belong to someone who mopped floors. It belonged to someone who had read and written the very language running across that whiteboard. And what made Cole Maddox shudder was this. She had seen it, and she had understood.
Janelle Reed never thought she'd return to the world of algorithms. Not after all those years. Not after everything she had given up. And yet that night, as she left the 27th floor and returned to the supply closet on the ground level, something inside her remained unsettled. It tapped gently, slowly, like a memory reviving itself one frame at a time, unwillingly. She peeled off her gloves, washed her hands in the small sink behind the janitorial area, looked into the mirror, and saw in her reflection a gaze she thought had vanished long ago. A part of her was still alive, still capable of reading the dancing numbers on that whiteboard, still able to feel when a model was off, like instinct, and that terrified her. Janelle's apartment was in East Austin, an area that wasn't exactly impoverished but never labeled safe. The tiny 2-bedroom unit sat in an old red brick building with a long hallway that always smelled of cigarette smoke and fried food from the ground floor. When she pushed the door open near 5 a.m., the kitchen light was still on. The elderly neighbor, Miss Lucinda, sat nodding off beside a cup of tea. "Micah was a good boy," she said without lifting her head. "He read about space. Says he wants to be a rocket engineer like his dad." Janelle nodded, whispered thanks, and walked into her son's room. Micah was asleep, clutching his old stuffed dinosaur, one knee resting on a dog-eared paperback. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. His breathing was steady, peaceful. She whispered, "I'm sorry I'm not home more often, but one day you'll understand." Then she turned off the light and closed the door. In the dim kitchen glow, Janelle poured herself a cup of black coffee, no sugar. She sat at the old wooden chair and placed her hands on the table. On it was a notebook, worn brown cover, faded text. AI Notes, G-Tech 2014. She hesitated to open it, but her hand moved on its own, flipping the pages. Inside, handwritten notes appeared, sharp, logical, and familiar. Traces of another life, another version of herself. Gradient descent becomes unstable when the learning rate exceeds 0.3. Sigmoid function should be normalized when used with dropout layers. Never trust input data without verifying noise ratio. She read, then smiled faintly. A sad smile. Who was I really? Where did I think I'd be by now? Maybe a PhD, maybe a researcher at a lab in Cambridge, maybe helping build something like Prometheus, not cleaning the floor outside its door. But life doesn't follow ideal vectors. It veers, suddenly and without warning. Janelle once studied AI at Georgia Tech, top of her class, nominated for a joint doctoral fellowship with Caltech. But in her fourth year, her husband, Daniel, died in a car accident while collecting image data for a research project. Everything fell apart in a matter of hours. Daniel was gone. Janelle was 4 months pregnant. She declined to defer, declined to return. She sold her laptop, moved out of student housing, and found the simplest job she could do without having to explain herself to anyone: night janitor. For 8 years, Janelle never told anyone about that past. Not at work, not to her neighbors, not even to herself. She lived quietly with discipline and punctuality. To others, she was just a hardworking, soft-spoken black woman. No one questioned why she knew how to access the ventilation system through the digital panel. No one noticed when she fixed the time clock software without calling IT, because no one paid attention to her. That was the safest way to survive, in the shadows. But last night, she had looked. She had seen the error, and worse, she had understood it. Now it followed her. At breakfast, while pouring milk for Micah, it flashed back again. While folding blankets, changing sheets, doing laundry, grocery shopping, it lingered in her mind like an unanswered equation. That evening, while helping her son with his math homework, Micah asked, "Why can variables like X come from two directions, Mom?" She froze. "Because some values don't just move in one direction," she replied. "Sometimes you can't see the mistake because you're looking at it the wrong way." Micah nodded. "Like when I couldn't find the remote yesterday because I kept thinking it was on the couch, but it was actually in the kitchen." Janelle laughed. "Exactly, just like that." That simple comment from her son jolted her. The people in that meeting room, Aiden, the data experts, they were looking at it from the wrong angle. They didn't lack tools or degrees. They lacked the ability to step back and see the whole. And that was something Janelle once had. The eyes of someone who approached every problem not with brute force, but with intuition. Intuition, the thing that never dies, no matter how long it's buried. That night, when she clocked in at Aperture, her feet led her to the 27th floor. Not to clean, but because she wanted to look at that whiteboard one more time. The glass door was still slightly ajar, lights still on, no one inside. She looked around. No cameras, no one watching. She took a deep breath and stepped in. The room was silent, the air cold with recycled conditioning. She walked to the whiteboard where the tangle of symbols remained, and once again her eyes found the error. She moved closer, her instincts overpowering her caution. Her hand lifted, just like it used to in Lecture Hall 210A at Georgia Tech. She studied each line. Where was it wrong? Linear function, input layer, unadjusted weights. The error wasn't structural, it was in the way they applied weight decay. Everything flowed from her mind like a song she'd memorized long ago. She grabbed a marker, hesitated, then set it down. Number, not my place. She turned to leave. But behind her, unknown to her, Cole Maddox had been standing in the hallway shadows the entire time. He said nothing, didn't move, but his eyes never left her. He had ordered a review of the security system after suspecting someone had altered the model. And the results showed a single fingerprint, not belonging to any engineer, on the model's manual toggle panel. He saw the name on the janitorial roster, Janelle Reed. He checked her file, nothing remarkable. But his gut told him otherwise. And now, watching her stand as if she had returned to the very world she once belonged to, he knew this wasn't coincidence. The next morning in the conference room, Aiden Voss entered looking unusually upbeat. "I think I found a new direction," he said, holding his iPad. "We're going to switch the activation from ReLU to Softmax and reattempt the gradient descent with a reverse update algorithm." Cole sat silently. He didn't respond. After Aiden finished presenting, Cole asked plainly, "Was anyone else in the room last night?" Aiden raised an eyebrow. "No one has access except my team." Cole gave a slight nod. "Just asking." At the end of the meeting, as everyone began to file out, Cole quietly said to his assistant, "Call Janelle Reed to my office. Not by email, call her directly, and don't let anyone else know." An experiment had begun. When Janelle walked into the 28th floor office of CEO Cole Maddox, she brought nothing with her but a janitor's uniform, a neatly tied bun, and the wary expression of someone accustomed to being overlooked. The room was so silent she could hear her own breathing echoing off the surrounding glass walls. Cole's office was as spacious as a small boardroom, minimalist in design, reinforced glass, neutral lighting, and not a single painting. Just a standing technical dashboard displaying AI performance logs on a soft silver background. Cole stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city of Austin below. When she approached, he finally spoke, not turning around, voice low and clear. "Do you know why I asked you up here?" Janelle swallowed hard, standing a bit straighter. I, I'm not sure, sir." Cole turned, his gaze cold as glass. "I need you to be honest, Ms. Reed. Last night you entered the 27th floor conference room, didn't you?" Janelle hesitated. She didn't know how much he already knew. Stepping back would be safer, but her instincts told her not to lie to this man. "I did go in. The door was open. I was just curious." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Curious enough to nearly reconfigure the entire matrix structure?" Her chest tightened. "I didn't touch the system, but you looked, and you understood." His voice wasn't accusatory. It was factual. Janelle didn't respond. The silence was a clearer confession than any words could offer. Cole stepped toward his desk, opened a thin personnel folder, flipped a few pages. "I reviewed your employee record. Nothing remarkable. No advanced degrees, no scientific work experience, just a vague note about former studies at Georgia Tech." He closed the folder. "I need the truth. Who are you?" Janelle drew a deep breath, her eyes meeting his, something she rarely did with anyone here. "I was a PhD candidate in AI Georgia Tech. My focus was nonlinear modeling and deep learning backpropagation. I left the program while writing my dissertation due to personal reasons." Cole nodded slightly. "And those personal reasons led you to work night janitor shifts for 8 years. I had to survive, had to raise my son. I chose this job because it didn't ask me to explain or prove anything. I was tired of having to prove myself." Cole was quiet for several seconds. He looked at her, really looked, analyzing her like a complex, undocumented model. "So that night, what exactly did you see?" Janelle blinked. "You really want to know? I didn't bring you up here to make small talk." She stepped toward a nearby interactive board, pulled a stylus from its tray. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but because for the first time in nearly a decade, she was drawing on a technical board as a professional, not as someone who cleaned beneath it. She wrote quickly, precisely, a chart illustrating gradient drift during training, a loss function distortion due to improper linear formatting, and finally the proposed fix, a conditional nonlinear sigmoid function. She explained as she wrote, without stumbling or digressing. Her voice was steady, deliberate, carrying the gravity of someone who had once lectured to full auditoriums of engineering students, not scrubbed floors between shifts. When she stopped, Cole had his arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but his eyes had changed. "You think that would improve the model?" "I don't think. I know. If the data you provided is accurate, then your algorithm is currently processing a nonlinear input sequence through a linear logic path, causing every prediction to be off by approximately 18%. That can cause model decay errors around the 40 to 45-second mark." Cole gave the slightest nod. "I've confirmed that. And when we applied the correction you scribbled down, the system's efficiency jumped 58.6%, outperformed the entire expert team." He stepped closer, voice quieter but no less sharp. "My only question is, why did you do it?" Janelle exhaled, like releasing a key she had gripped tightly for 8 years. "Because I couldn't stand watching such an obvious error being ignored. Even though I wasn't invited into that room, my eyes still saw it." Cole didn't smile, but for the first time his gaze softened. "Good, because I want you back in that room, in a new role." She froze. "What do you mean?" "I need someone brave enough to look directly at the error without fear of judgment, and skilled enough to fix it, even with no support." He pulled a thin folder from his drawer and placed it in front of her. "Temporary title, technical consultant, not official, not public, but you'll be working alongside Aiden Voss's engineering team. I want to see what happens when we put an outsider inside their safe zone. Janelle took a half step back. Do you think they'll accept me? I don't care what they think. I care about results. Janelle tightened her grip, eyes on the folder. She didn't fear returning to that room because of Aiden or the engineers. It was a deeper fear, fear of herself. Fear that once she returned, she'd no longer be invisible. And once people truly saw her, they'd also try to tear her down. But then she thought of Micah, and the feeling of writing formulas on that board again. That feeling, like finally breathing after years of silence, was stronger than fear. I need a day, she said. Cole glanced at his watch. You have 12 hours. He turned toward his chair, opened his laptop. And Reed, starting now, I want you to put the mop down. Your eyes weren't meant for dirt. They're meant for something much bigger. As she left the office, her hand still gripping the temporary contract folder, like the last scrap of metal connecting her to a dream long buried, Cole pressed the intercom. Reschedule the AI engineering team meeting. Tomorrow morning. I want them to meet Ms. Janelle Reed again. This time, not as the janitor. At 7 a.m., the 27th floor of Aperture Core welcomed the first sunlight through a long glass wall stretching across the row of rooms. The light filtered through the technical blinds, landing on the polished stone floor where the long conference table still carried the faint scent of disinfectant. Something in the room felt different compared to most mornings. Quieter, tenser, colder. The AI engineers, 10 of them seated around the table, led by the ever-noticeable Aiden Voss, were all present. None of them knew why CEO Cole Maddox had called them in early, especially on the day of a critical model test. Aiden, dressed in a crisp white shirt, a gold watch gleaming at his wrist, was the first to break the silence. Anyone have a clue? Is this about yesterday's patch? No one responded. Some looked down at their tablets. Others reviewed model data on their phones. All of them were trying to conceal one common thing: anxiety. When the door swung open, every head turned. But it wasn't just Cole Maddox who walked in. Beside him was someone no one expected to see here: Janelle Reed. Still the same calm-faced, slow-paced woman, but today she wasn't in her janitor's uniform. Instead, she wore a light gray button-down shirt, plain dark slacks, her hair neatly tied up, a small notebook clutched in her hand. She walked in behind Cole, her gaze neither arrogant nor afraid, only carrying an unsettling stillness. Aiden blinked. A few engineers glanced at each other, then back at her, as if trying to process what exactly they were witnessing. Cole stood at the head of the table, not taking a seat. His voice cut through the silence like a tap on glass, sharp and final. I've asked you here early because there's been a change in the team structure. This is Ms. Janelle Reed. As of today, she will serve as the technical consultant on the Prometheus project. Her role is not temporary. She'll be working directly with the team to help finalize the model. No one spoke for 10 seconds. No one dared. Finally, it was Aiden who broke the silence, his tone still polite, but his eyes sharp as a thin blade. Excuse me, Mr. Maddox. This seems like a decision that warrants more context. I don't see Miss Janelle's profile anywhere in the engineering system. She's an internal employee, Cole replied, and her capabilities have been proven outside the system. Aiden gave a thin smile, unable to hide the sarcasm. I'm just concerned about the model's integrity. Unverified personnel can pose risk when accessing core AI architecture. Even if she's a very dedicated member of the cleaning staff, Janelle identified and corrected a critical error in the model your team has overlooked for 3 weeks. Cole's tone didn't change. I ran the model 3 times using her correction. Performance increased by over 58%. Meanwhile, your team has been plateaued at 22% since the start of the month. That's the only reason I need to bring her in. Aiden's face flushed slightly. A nearby engineer darted a glance at Janelle. The woman stood motionless, her hands steady, eyes locked on Cole, as if she were no longer the one who used to push a janitor's cart through the hall just days ago. The air in the room felt as if it had lost oxygen. Cole nodded toward her. Janelle, you may introduce yourself. She stepped forward, her voice not loud, but firm as a nail being driven. My name is Janelle Reed. I was a doctoral candidate at Georgia Tech, focused on nonlinear machine learning. I left the program midway due to family circumstances, but my mind never left. One simple sentence. Not boastful, not threatening, but it made the entire room fall silent. Aiden nodded slightly, his tone still polished to the point of insult. So, Ms. Reed, I'm curious, where exactly will you be starting on the Prometheus model, or are you still getting familiar? Janelle responded immediately, without looking at any document. I'll begin with the third hidden layer, where there's currently an input skew issue due to a misprocessed linear function. The weight values are increasing non-linearly in this layer, causing gradient instability by the fifth cycle. Another engineer furrowed his brow. You mean because the linear mapping wasn't renormalized after batch norm? No, she replied, because you've ignored the residual weights from layer 2. They didn't disappear, they're accumulating. Cole smiled, just slightly, for the first time that morning. Now you understand why I brought her in? After the meeting, the engineering team dispersed. A few talked quietly among themselves. Aiden walked briskly toward the hallway, casting a glance past Janelle as if she were invisible. But Cole wasn't about to let that pass. He called out, Voss, stay a moment. Aiden froze. Cole stepped closer, voice low and sharp as a razor. You don't need to like change, but you do need to adapt. I don't hire people to protect their egos. I hire them to solve problems. And if Ms. Reed can do that, then you'd better learn how to work with her. Or, his gaze turned cold. You can leave the project. Your choice. Aiden didn't reply, but his hand clenched at his side, eyes shifting away from Cole, landing on Janelle again. This time not just with contempt, but with threat. Janelle saw it. She was no stranger to that kind of look. She'd received hundreds like it, from professors, investors, engineers, even former research colleagues. It was the look of those who weren't angry because she was wrong, but because she dared to be right in a place they deemed beneath her. And it always led to a kind of unspoken war. That evening, Janelle sat in her small apartment, beside a desk lamp, reviewing the model data Cole had sent privately through the internal system. Micah lay asleep on the couch, hugging his stuffed dinosaur, the TV playing a faint old cartoon in the background. She opened her personal laptop, 8 years old, once bought by Daniel when they were both still graduate students. A small sticky note was still on its surface, handwritten. You may not have all the answers, but you always see the error before anyone else. Don't forget that. She hadn't forgotten, but she knew, starting tomorrow, everyone on the 27th floor would try to make her forget. Janelle Reed's second morning as technical consultant on the Prometheus project began with an unusual silence inside the glass-walled meeting room on the 27th floor. There were no greetings, no usual nods, not a single friendly glance from her new colleagues. She entered, placed her notebook on the table, and logged into the internal system using the temporary access code provided by Cole Maddox. A few people stole glances at her, as if waiting for her to make a mistake they could quietly laugh at. But no mistake came. She logged in successfully, accessed exactly the dataset she needed, and ran the test model like any other expert in the room. That, in itself, made the atmosphere heavier. Aiden Voss, seated at the head of the table as usual, opened the meeting by reviewing the team's 24-hour progress. We retested the model using the sigmoid structure in the third hidden layer, as suggested by the correction from the other day, he said, deliberately avoiding Janelle's name. The result showed a slight increase, but nothing significant. We may need to revisit the learning rate and how the weights are initialized. Janelle raised her head, speaking softly but clearly. The issue isn't the learning rate. It's that the batch size wasn't renormalized when sigmoid was added. Without adjusting for that, the model will saturate. Aiden turned to her, eyes sharp as needles. Ms. Reed, I think you may need more time to understand our internal procedures before making such assessments. Janelle didn't blink. I'm not making an assessment. I'm stating what happened. The data's clear in last night's report. The room went quiet. A young engineer named Malik raised an eyebrow in her direction. Another, Amanda, glanced sideways at Aiden, waiting for his reaction. Aiden gave a thin smile, spinning his pen slowly on the table. May I ask where you learned to read model structures from just a few lines of data and draw conclusions? I spent nearly 6 years researching nonlinear, deep learning systems. Back when PyTorch didn't even have a stable version. I don't read academically anymore. I read from experience, like a chef tasting a dish and knowing exactly what's missing. Aiden scoffed. Too bad AI isn't cooking. Too bad your team's been mixing the wrong ingredients for 3 weeks straight. A dry laugh from one corner of the room stalled the tension. Amanda coughed abruptly to mask her surprise. Malik bit his lip and looked down at his laptop. Aiden, no longer smiling, stood and walked to the interactive board. All right, let's clarify. He began redrawing the entire structure of the hidden layer from the original blueprint. Every line, every symbol placed with precision, as though putting on a technical showcase for those who supposedly didn't know better. This is how we designed it to optimize calculation speed for time series financial analysis. He looked directly at Janelle. I want to hear from you specifically. Where's the flaw? Why does it matter? And what's the proof?
Janelle stood, walked calmly to the board, unflinching. Pen in hand, she picked up where Aiden had stopped, pointing at the convolution section in the second layer, then linking it to the input of the third. Here, you didn't reset the normalization function after each epoch. So the outlier values started multiplying through each training cycle. This led to accumulation effects and caused unstable gradient shifts. And you think we didn't know that? I don't assume anything. I just point out the error. Whether you knew or not, I can't control. Malik stood up. Hold on, let me check last night's log. He pulled up his computer, flicking through several auto-saved logs. Everyone watched. A minute later, he looked up. She's right. The normalization function wasn't called again after the first cycle. Aiden turned sharply. We used auto-reset in the helper function. It was overridden by a lower script. She caught that. A wave of silence swept the room. Janelle said nothing else. She placed the pen back in its tray and returned to her seat. Aiden remained standing by the board, staring at the formulas as if they had just betrayed him. When he returned to the table, his voice was sharper than before. Fine, Ms. Reed has sharp eyes, but an AI system isn't limited to one model layer. You may spot small errors, but you don't understand the overall strategy we're deploying. Janelle answered immediately. I understand it exactly. That's why I'm here. Her voice wasn't loud, but it echoed. Her eyes didn't leave Aiden's. This was no longer a technical exchange. It was an unspoken battle between someone long accustomed to technical authority and someone who'd once been forced to abandon it. The rest of the team stayed out of it. They knew any word now would declare a side. After the meeting, Janelle returned to her temporary workstation, a small corner near the window. She powered up her machine and began modifying the helper function to stabilize the model. She knew Aiden was watching. She knew his team would soon retaliate. But she had no other option. This wasn't just about saving a model. This was about proving she had never lost her ability. That she belonged here, even if no one wanted her to. That afternoon, during a smaller internal meeting, Cole asked Aiden, "Has Ms. Reed found anything else?" Aiden replied curtly, coldly, "She's sharp. But she's never worked on a team." Or maybe, Cole replied without flinching, "Your team's never worked with someone who isn't like themselves." Aiden said nothing. That evening, when Janelle returned home, Micah ran to greet her like always. But this time, he asked a question that caught her off guard. "Did you have fun at work today, Mom?" She paused for a few seconds, then nodded. "Yes. A little tired. But yes." Micah grinned. "Good. Because today I drew a picture of you standing in front of a big board, like a professor. I think you'd be a great professor." She hugged him and felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. Belief. But she knew, behind the glass walls on the 27th floor, someone was already planning to make sure her tomorrow wouldn't be so joyful.
Janelle Reed's third day on the Prometheus AI team began with a small but unmistakable detail. Her name had been removed from the shared document list on the internal server. At first, she thought it was a system glitch, but when she asked Malik, the one who had seemed neutral, he looked away awkwardly and muttered, "Not sure. Probably just a temporary permissions update." But when she checked the internal invite for the upcoming engineering team meeting, She saw she hadn't been tagged there either. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. during her work shift in the glass-walled room on the 27th floor, and she wasn't invited. Janelle immediately understood what was happening. This was the beginning of a familiar tactic: technical Cold War. Isolation, not through direct attacks, but through subtle exclusion designed to make the target feel like they never truly belonged. And the person behind it didn't need to be guessed. It was clearly Aiden Voss. He couldn't remove her publicly from the team, but he could make her feel like she was never truly part of it. At exactly 8:57 a.m., she stepped into the meeting room. No one said a word. Malik flinched at the sight of her. Amanda quickly glanced toward Aiden, and Aiden himself stood at the board presenting a performance model. When he saw her, he didn't pause or acknowledge her. He simply continued speaking as if she weren't there. As I was saying, we'll be retesting this structure without any additional parameter modifications outside of the core design group. We need to eliminate uncontrollable elements. Janelle sat at the end of the table, opened her notebook. She said nothing. She didn't react. She had been through these kinds of battles before, back in graduate school. She knew the tactics: pretend not to hear, ignore emails, revoke access, avoid eye contact during conversations, erase her name from even the smallest contributions. No harsh words, just a slow erosion meant to convince her that her presence was an inconvenience. But back then, she had walked away because she was pregnant. She needed peace. This time, she had nothing to lose. After the meeting, she returned to her desk, checked the system logs, and discovered her technical annotation rights on the primary repository had been revoked. Once again, she had been cut off from the team's core exchange. This time, she didn't ask Malik or Amanda. She messaged Cole Maddox directly. Clear, concise, no complaint, no emotion. My annotation rights on the internal AI repo have been revoked. I cannot work without the same access as every other team member. If I'm still expected to contribute, I need equal permissions in the system. 10 minutes later, her access was restored, along with a short response from Cole. You have full access as promised. Continue your work. But Janelle knew this wouldn't be easy. Aiden was playing a long game, and he had allies. In every meeting that followed, whenever she spoke, no one replied. When she sent questions through the internal chat, no one answered. When she proposed a small revision in a submodel, the entire team acted as if nothing had been said. All she could do was write her notes by hand, run tests in her own partition space, and verify the results alone. And the more she worked, the clearer it became. Their model was veering off course. The variables were becoming increasingly unstable. But every report was scrubbed clean before submission. They were covering up the flaws so they'd have someone to blame if things went wrong. One night, she stayed late to run her own version of the model using a structure she had personally developed. The results showed an 11% improvement after just 2 training cycles. She saved the logs, exported the report, planning to present it the next morning. But when she returned to her desk at 8:30 a.m., her entire personal folder had been deleted. The only person with admin-level access to the system was Aiden. She sent a message requesting restoration. No response. She followed up. Still silence. She didn't call Cole. Not yet. She wanted to see how far the team would go. And just as she predicted, the next morning in the team meeting, Aiden presented a new test result that, by his description, was nearly identical to the model she had built the night before. We've achieved a 10.8% improvement by reworking the substructure and tweaking the weight parameters. This was a team effort, and I believe this is the direction we should pursue. Janelle looked at him, said nothing, but her eyes burned with fury. She knew he had stolen her model, deleted the logs, and put his name on it. And the rest of the team, whether complicit or silent, stood by and watched. That evening, she sat alone in the break room, holding a cup of cold coffee. Alone. She thought back to her early days in the lab, back when she had dreamed of becoming a professor, once hoped to write a book on the philosophy of AI modeling. All those dreams had been eroded over time, worn down by suspicious glances, constant questions like, "Where did you study?" As if her skin color was a misplaced variable in their perfect equation. And now it was all happening again. Just more refined this time. Just then, Aiden walked into the break room. No one else was around. He closed the door behind him, holding a fresh cup of coffee, his voice calm, as if making small talk. I know what you're thinking, Janelle. You think I'm trying to push you out. You think I'm playing dirty. But the truth is, you don't belong here. Not because you're not good enough, but because you don't fit. You disrupt the structure. You shake things up. You make people lose faith in the process. You think you've won because you pointed out a few flaws. But the truth is, none of that is worth risking your reputation over. You should go back to where you belong. At least there, you're respected. Janelle stared at him without blinking. You don't hate me because I'm wrong. You hate me because I was right and didn't ask for permission. Aiden smirked. You misunderstand. I don't hate you. I just know how the world works. And I know how to protect my position. If you don't leave, you won't just lose your shot here. You'll be blacklisted from every major technical project. You'll be labeled uncooperative. Trust me, I'm not joking. He turned and walked away, leaving the coffee on the table. She didn't respond. Not a word. But deep down, something was shifting. She knew this battle couldn't be won with words or emails. It had to be won with the only thing that couldn't be denied: results. And she was ready to play it her way. All throughout the fourth day, Janelle Reed received no response from the technical team, even after she had submitted 2 reports directly addressing the error accumulation in a submodel. She tried one last time at 3 p.m., attaching the results from her own simulation and sending them to Aiden, Amanda, Malik, and the team's official technical inbox. No one responded, not a single acknowledgement. And when the 4 p.m. technical meeting began, Aiden didn't mention any of it. Instead, he led the team in testing a new version of the model, one that she could easily tell was a near copy of the substructure she had proposed, with only a few insignificant parameters altered. No credit, no name in the update, not a word of thanks. At that moment, Janelle was no longer angry. What she felt instead was a strange kind of hollowness spreading in her chest, like someone waking up from a long dream, only to realize they'd returned to the place they once longed for, only to find it unrecognizable. She had made it into that room. She had spoken. She had proven herself. She had fixed the errors. But what she received in return wasn't opportunity. It was calculated silence, doors shutting in the most sophisticated way, by making her feel that she was wrong for even trying to be right. She left the office at 6 p.m. without saying a word to anyone. On the number 8 bus back to East Austin, she rested her head against the window looking outside. The city was still buzzing, the traffic still thick, the stoplights blinking at every corner, like the steady heartbeat of a machine that didn't care who had just been pushed out of its system. She thought of Micah, of the drawing he had taped on the fridge, the one where she stood at a podium with a marker in hand, beside the crooked lettering, Mom equals genius. She had once believed that was true, and when she joined Prometheus, she had dared to hope the world might see it too. But maybe in some places, it wasn't intelligence that decided your place. It was endurance, and she had endured enough. That night, after Micah had gone to bed, she opened her laptop and stared at her inbox. She sat in front of the blank screen for nearly 10 minutes. No typing, no thinking. Just looking at the composition window. Finally, she began to write. No circling around, no assigning blame. She stated her reasons plainly. Because I no longer see my contributions being fairly acknowledged. Because my technical efforts have been systematically and institutionally dismissed. And because I cannot continue working in an environment where people believe a mop defines my worth. She signed, Janelle Reed. Nothing more. The next morning she arrived earlier than usual. She wore her old janitor's uniform, not out of shame, but because it was a real part of her journey. She hid nothing. She walked straight to the 28th floor, to Cole Maddox's office. The assistant began to speak, but he had already signaled for her to come in. He stood by the window holding a coffee he hadn't touched. When he saw her, he said only one sentence. I read it. She nodded. I wanted to deliver the letter myself, because I'm not leaving because I failed. I'm leaving because I tried, and I refuse to silence myself just to keep a seat at the table. Cole didn't respond immediately. After a moment, he spoke, eyes still facing the window. I thought I had enough authority to shield you from that kind of thing. You do have authority, but authority doesn't change hearts. especially when people believe they're defending order. I need you to stay. I know, but I can't. Not under these conditions. I have a son, and he shouldn't grow up watching his mother erased from what she built. Then accepted in silence. Cole set the coffee down. Then let me be the one to say it. You were right, and the system was wrong. She nodded. No smile. Thank you, but I don't need recognition. I just need to not disappear quietly. She turned to go. As she exited the building, the usual security guards nodded at her like any other day. But this time, she stopped and nodded back. A small gesture, but a greeting from someone who was no longer a shadow. At 9 a.m. that morning, the entire Prometheus system began to slow down. Old bugs resurfaced. Submodels began to destabilize after 30 seconds of runtime. The team's latest technical group improvements stopped working correctly due to the absence of precise base adjustments from Janelle's earlier experiments. Aiden sat in the control room, running his hands through his hair, not understanding what was happening. Amanda glanced quietly at Malik. Malik said nothing, eyes fixed on his keyboard. Both of them knew the only person who could decipher the cascade of failures had walked away. Cole Maddox had never driven himself to East Austin. He had a private driver for most out-of-downtown meetings or visits to places where his presence might draw attention. But that morning there was no assistant with him, no dark-windowed SUV, just him, an older-than-usual Lexus, and a handwritten note with an address. Apartment 17C, Cedar Point Building. This wasn't part of any plan. He didn't make it a habit to visit employees' homes, especially not after they had formally submitted a resignation. But something about Janelle Reed had left him restless. Maybe it was the way she had stood in his office. No pleading, no apology, no retraction, just someone who had lived long enough to know the value of silence. He had never seen anyone in the engineering team look him in the eye and say, "I'm no longer here because I was too right to be ignored." The Cedar Point building had no security guard, no lobby carpet, no uniform nameplates on the doors. But it had something else. The smell of real life, the scent of cooking oil from the floor below, the sound of children playing in the hallway, the tremble of an old washing machine from the shared laundry room. He knocked on the door of 17C. A few moments later, it cracked open. A boy around 9 with messy curls and robot print pajamas looked up at him. "Who are you?" Cole paused for a second. "My name's Cole. I work with your mom." The boy squinted at him, then called out, "Mom, there's an old guy with silver hair here to see you." A familiar voice replied from inside, "Let me see who it is, Micah." Janelle appeared, wearing a plain t-shirt and faded jeans. She wasn't surprised. She looked at him as if she had already predicted this. "You came to see me?" "I came to hear the rest." The apartment was small but tidy. On the dining table were a few paper models Micah had been cutting out. In the corner sat an old laptop and a small whiteboard with logic symbols drawn in green marker. Cole glanced around and smiled faintly. "Still teaching Micah math?" "And logic. He asked me last week, why should I solve a problem if no one counts the effort? I didn't have an answer, so I taught him how to solve it, so he'd know he was right for himself." He nodded. "Prometheus sent me a report this morning. They can't decode the last parameter string you left behind." "I didn't leave any code, just the parameters I used when testing the model, the ones they said they didn't need." "You knew the model would collapse after you left?" "I knew it had been collapsing for a long time. I was just the last one not pretending it was still intact." Cole was silent for a while. He had never felt like a junior engineer could talk to him as if he were the one who had something to prove. But Janelle wasn't trying to convince him. She simply had nothing left to lose. "Do you know how long I've been watching you?" Janelle raised an eyebrow. "I'm the one who placed you on the engineering team, right?" "Number you were just the final signature. I was placed by the system. Data flagged me as qualified. The one who signed off was just a formality." "So you think I'm just a formality?" "Number, I think you're the only one not guided by machines, but sometimes you let the system do your thinking for you." Micah brought out 2 glasses of orange juice, handing them to both. Cole took his and set it down without drinking. "I want you to come back. I'm not coming back to fix a broken model. I need a system that knows how to apologize when it breaks itself." "You want me to apologize?" "Number, I want you to fix it." Not for me. For the next person who walks into that room with a whiteboard and a blueprint, only to have their name erased before the model even runs. Cole sighed. I can't just replace Aiden. I can't fire the entire engineering team. I'm not asking you to fire anyone. I'm asking you to remember one thing. Next time you see an unfamiliar name on the candidate list, don't ask where did they study. Ask, have they ever kept going despite being ignored? Because if they have, that's someone you should hold on to. Before leaving, Cole looked around one last time. Where does Micah go to school? Public School 11. I'll have someone reach out. Prometheus has a STEM scholarship program for kids starting 4th grade. Not because I owe you, but because Micah shouldn't have to learn how to survive in a world where his mother was erased from a system she once repaired. Janelle said nothing, but the look in her eyes as she closed the door told him. She understood and she appreciated it. 3 days after the visit to the small apartment in East Austin, Cole Maddox stepped onto the stage at Prometheus Group's annual technology conference, held in the main ballroom of the Monarch Hotel downtown. The event had been planned as a platform for company leadership to present the year's breakthroughs, including the launch of a new predictive analytics system, a product heavily promoted by internal media as a team-led innovation that redefines real-time logistics. Posters throughout the lobby featured Amanda Rothwell, Strategic Engineering Director, under the banner, Rewriting the Algorithm of Trust. Below it, the company slogan, Clarity, Velocity, Purpose. But backstage, the only person who didn't see the purpose clearly was Amanda herself. She hadn't had a full night's sleep since Janelle left. Errors in the system had grown more visible, and the foundational assumptions of the new model continued to collapse under real-world data testing. Malik, once responsible for internal checks, had gone unusually quiet in meetings. Aiden had practically disappeared, claiming to be sick but still responding on Slack like a technical ghost. And Cole, he hadn't said anything except for a single line sent to Amanda 2 days earlier. I want to review your full presentation by 8 a.m., the morning of the conference. Amanda had shown up on time with a PowerPoint deck, model samples, and a system performance cycle chart. She walked him through the improvements, pointed out the optimized metrics, emphasized team leadership, carefully avoiding Janelle's name. Cole said nothing. He just watched her the entire time, then finally asked, You still remember you're an engineer, not a spokesperson, right? The question caught her off guard. I was assigned as the team's technical communications lead. But you still understand the language of logic, don't you? Then don't lie. Not even once. Not on stage. Not in front of hundreds of people. Because if you do, those numbers won't forgive you. By 9 a.m., the ballroom was filled with over 600 people. Investors, strategic partners, internal teams from 12 different cities, and nearly the entire Prometheus executive board. The lights dimmed. The main screen displayed a moving logo. The host's voice rang out, introducing the keynote. A turning point in operational data analytics. Please welcome Strategic Engineering Director, Amanda Rothwell. Amanda walked out, mic already clipped. She began with familiar words. The world is changing. Data is the new fuel of innovation. She advanced to the second slide, a chart showing the optimization cycle. But on the third slide, the image glitched, and instead of a graph, a single line of code appeared. Def resilience, self-return, silence breaks false. The room froze. She tried to return to the previous slide, but the entire display flipped to a white screen. Then a video began playing automatically, beyond her control. It was a simulation of the Prometheus system running in 2 environments, one with the current engineering team's proposed model, and another with the model Janelle had built 6 weeks earlier. The bottom of the screen displayed runtime and error rate. The error rate in Amanda's version was 3 times higher than Janelle's, especially after the 2-minute mark. No narration, no commentary, just raw, undeniable truth. The audience murmured. A few phones were raised to record. Amanda stood frozen, unable to override the system. She glanced off stage, where Cole Maddox stood, not surprised. When the video ended, the final screen displayed a single line, no name, no signature. You can't delete proof. You can only delay recognition. The host's voice returned awkwardly. We apologize for the technical issue. Please bear with us for a moment. The lights dimmed again. Amanda rushed off stage. She shouted, "Who did that?" "That wasn't in my version." A technician shook his head. The slides were pushed from the central system. No one on the team had access to edit after 6 a.m. today. Cole stepped forward. You erase someone from your success. Don't be surprised when the system corrects that itself. You allowed this? Number-wise, simply let it happen. Moments later, the entire company received an internal email from Cole Maddox. Subject: rewriting recognition. In it, he did not name Janelle, but he clearly stated that there were contributions overlooked during the development of Prometheus 4.0, and that the company would reopen the technical credit validation process and reinstate all omitted names in the innovation records. He also announced the formation of an independent panel of senior engineers to reassess the full model chain and replace the current technical leadership if needed. The email concluded with a single sentence: because sometimes it is the quiet ones who rewrite the truth, through sheer persistence. That afternoon, the entire engineering building was shaken. Amanda never returned from the break room. Malik submitted his resignation that same day. No explanation given. And Aiden, the one who once called Janelle the opinionated janitor, was placed under professional ethics review after it was discovered he had altered contributor names in the project record software. The name Jay Reed was restored across all pre-release model documentation. But the most remarkable detail wasn't the name. It was the reaction from the younger engineers newly hired at Prometheus. They began sending emails to HR, saying they felt hope after seeing a broken model corrected by the very system that once ignored the person who fixed it. At 9 a.m. the following morning, the homepage of Prometheus Network suddenly turned into a blank whiteboard. Gone was the usual deep blue background. Gone was the slogan, "We accelerate the possible." There was only a single embedded video in the center of the page titled, "Who wrote the code?" The clip lasted just 2 minutes and 41 seconds. No effects, no voiceover, just a screen recording of computer code being written line by line, with full comments, exact timestamps, and commit information clearly showing the author, Jay Reed. Every line bore authenticated server time from Aperture Core's internal systems. Impossible to fake. The clip ended with a display of an email in which Aiden Voss asked Janelle to delete the original data for infrastructure security reasons, followed by Janelle's reply underneath, "I will not erase the truth just to clarify someone else's role." After the clip, there were no comments. But at the bottom of the page, one simple message appeared. The system remembers what people try to forget. Within an hour, platforms like LinkedIn, X, formerly Twitter, and Reddit exploded. The name Janelle Reed began trending. Users from other tech firms started sharing stories they had witnessed, instances where the names of minority contributors were replaced by more presentable colleagues. A software engineer from Seattle wrote, "Back in 2021, my friend wrote most of the security module for the city's traffic monitoring system, but his name was left off the final report. The reason? He wasn't media trained enough to speak in public." Another female engineer from Boston commented, "They don't delete the contributions. They just move them to a folder called temporarily unrecognized." Meanwhile, at Aperture Core headquarters in Austin, attorneys began arriving. Janelle, though she had not officially returned, remained silent. But upstairs, Cole Maddox was doing something unprecedented. He called a public press conference right in the main hall, inviting media representatives and board members, including those who had previously voted to erase the original technical records. There was no banner on stage, no theme, just a round table and 3 microphones. When the lights came on, Cole was the first to walk out. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a gray button-down shirt and khaki pants. No tie, no company pin. He sat down and looked directly at the camera. At 9 a.m. the following morning, the homepage of Prometheus Network suddenly turned into a blank whiteboard. Gone was the usual deep blue background. Gone was the slogan, "We accelerate the possible." There was only a single embedded video in the center of the page titled, "Who wrote the code?" The clip lasted just 2 minutes and 41 seconds. No effects, no voiceover, just a screen recording of computer code being written line by line, with full comments, exact timestamps, and commit information clearly showing the author. J. Reed. Every line bore authenticated server time from Aperture Core's internal systems. Impossible to fake. The clip ended with a display of an email in which Aiden Voss asked Janelle to delete the original data for infrastructure security reasons, followed by Janelle's reply underneath, "I will not erase the truth just to clarify someone else's role." After the clip, there were no comments. But at the bottom of the page, one simple message appeared. The system remembers what people try to forget. Within an hour, platforms like LinkedIn, X, formerly Twitter, and Reddit exploded. The name Janelle Reed began trending. Users from other tech firms started sharing stories they had witnessed. Instances where the names of minority contributors were replaced by more presentable colleagues. A software engineer from Seattle wrote, "Back in 2021, my friend wrote most of the security module for the city's traffic monitoring system, but his name was left off the final report. The reason? He wasn't media trained enough to speak in public." Another female engineer from Boston commented, "They don't delete the contributions. They just move them to a folder called temporarily unrecognized." Meanwhile, at Aperture Core headquarters in Austin, attorneys began arriving. Janelle, though she had not officially returned, remained silent. But upstairs, Cole Maddox was doing something unprecedented. He called a public press conference right in the main hall, inviting media representatives and board members, including those who had previously voted to erase the original technical records. There was no banner on stage, no theme, just a round table and 3 microphones. When the lights came on, Cole was the first to walk out. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a gray button-down shirt and khaki pants. No tie, no company pin. He sat down and looked directly at the camera. "We're not here to offer a formulaic apology. We're here to explain why a system built by some of the best minds in the industry chose to ignore the very best among them." He paused. "Janelle Reed is the author of the original model behind the operational prediction platform we currently use. Her name was removed from the revision history due to the subjective decision of certain individuals on the technical management team. Those individuals have now been suspended pending independent investigation. We cannot reverse time, but we can record things accurately, the way they should have been documented from the start." He stood up, stepped away from the mic, and signaled to the media team to display an official document, revealing for the first time the contributor chart embedded on the main user interface of the product. At the center, Janelle Reed, Chief Model Architect, former contract position. There was no applause, just a long silence that served as a form of collective agreement. However, the biggest surprise came from the outside. Immediately after the press conference, a journalist from the circuit, a leading tech and human rights publication, released a nearly 6,000-word investigative report titled, "The Invisible Credits: How Tech Erases the Ones Who Build It." The article not only mentioned Janelle, but included interviews with 8 other former contract workers at Aperture Core. One of them, Elena Soto, who had handled alpha stage deployment testing, said she was asked to sign a waiver denying recognition rights after an internal restructuring process. Another, Jamal Brooks, said he was excluded from the final technical debrief simply because the meeting overlapped with a personal religious holiday. The article ended with an open question. Can modern technology truly be called progress if it's still built on the silence of those it erases? Cole Maddox read the article in his office. He didn't message Janelle, didn't call, but he stood up, removed the glass board from the wall, the one that used to show the project development timeline in dry erase marker. He wiped it completely clean, then wrote a single line. Micah's mom wrote this. At that exact moment, Janelle was sitting in a small bakery in East Austin, with Micah beside her, working on homework. Everything around them remained calm, as if the truth had never had the power to shake the foundations of a billion-dollar company. But her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number read, "Thanks for letting silence speak." No signature. But Janelle knew it wasn't from Cole. It was from someone on the internal review team, a person she had once taught how to read algorithms in an early draft 3 years ago, back when that person was just an intern. That sentence wasn't enough, but it wasn't meaningless. The engineers called off their collective resignation, but issued an official proposal. Every technical contribution must be accompanied by the author's record and independently verified. All models must include credit for the original designer, not just the publisher. And most importantly, everyone who had ever been erased would receive a formal apology and be publicly restored as intellectual property holders, both internally and on the product interface. But the backlash didn't only come from industry insiders. On social media, anonymous accounts began circulating personal photos of Janelle, her old address, and comments suggesting she was playing the victim to raise her profile. One person wrote, "If she's really that good, why doesn't she start her own company?" Those questions didn't need to be fair. They just needed to plant doubt. And in a world where information travels faster than truth, doubt alone can break someone. Cole used his ex account for the first time to post a single line. Janelle didn't ask for credit. She just didn't expect to be erased. The quote was shared over 400,000 times in 2 days. But Janelle posted nothing. She turned off notifications, withdrew from social media, focused on teaching evening math classes at the community center, where she had worked ever since her contract was terminated 3 years ago. One evening after class, she found a handwritten letter in her locker. "You don't know me, but I'm a second-year engineering student. I almost dropped out because I thought there was no place for someone like me in tech. But when I read your story, I decided to retake my algorithm structures class. I just wanted to say, thank you for not staying silent." No signature, no return address, but enough reason for Janelle to keep showing up, not to reclaim an old title, but to change how the system recognizes the existence of people who don't wear suits, don't sit in boardrooms, and don't carry VIP passes. But who are the ones that built the foundation in the first place? In Cole Maddox's office, a new board was mounted. In the center was a revised timeline, clearly stating each milestone, who wrote what, who reviewed it, who deployed it. No initials, no team contribution. Each person listed by full name. Below the board, a small engraved metal plaque read, "If they vanish from the credits, the product has no soul." 8 weeks after the internal crisis and the wave of backlash, Aperture Core's headquarters was still being cleaned, detail by detail. Old nameplates were being removed. Several private offices were converted into shared collaboration spaces, and a new door was opened. The Foundation Room, a space dedicated to documenting the history of the company's founding and its contributions, not just of the founders, but of those who had once been forgotten. In that room, the first photo to be hung wasn't of the board of directors. It was of Janelle Reed, standing with three others, one hand holding a circuit board, the other holding the early prototype model of Prometheus. Beneath the photo, a single caption read, "The ones who knew it first." During that time, Cole Maddox, who once held full authority over the company's strategic direction, formally stepped down as executive chairman. But instead of leaving completely, he chose to take on a new role, head of institutional memory, the person responsible for overseeing the documentation, restoration, and accuracy of the company's internal history. A position with no real power, but with moral weight. He still remembered that night, when he sat on the steps of Janelle's home, holding the report he himself had signed, filled with redacted names replaced by vague titles like technical support lead, creative collaborator, or worse, non-identifiable content. Janelle looked at him, not angry, not accusatory, and said only one sentence. "If you truly want to change this culture, don't use power to redeem yourself. Use memory to keep others from making your mistake." And from that sentence, he began rewriting every record, not to honor Janelle, but to redefine what it means to have a trustworthy foundation. Meanwhile, Janelle started a new path, not a competing company, not a tech product, but a center called the Family Formula. It didn't sell software. It didn't seek investors. It was a space for engineers who had been excluded from the industry for not having Ivy League degrees, for not having the right background, or for being deemed not a cultural fit. She didn't call them students. She called them builders, because in her words, builders don't need degrees to begin. They need a space that doesn't break them. The center had no formal curriculum. Each group chose their own problem to solve, from water filtration systems for underserved communities to simple AI tools that help the visually impaired read text. After 6 months, each group was required to present their project to a panel of advisors, including the former chief technology officer of Aperture, someone who had once opposed reinstating Janelle's name, but after the scandal had issued a public apology and volunteered as a mentor without pay. One day during the first presentation, a young team of just 3 builders showcased a system that used facial expressions to translate vocal tones, designed to help autistic children understand emotional intonation. When asked why they chose this project, the boy in the center replied, "Because I used to not understand when my mom was sad or angry. I only knew I was wrong when she cried." The entire room went silent. Then came the applause. Not because the project was perfect, but because it had soul. Janelle quietly left the room after the presentation. Out in the hallway, she saw Cole standing there, holding a guest badge. The family formula. Guest ID. He smiled. She nodded. No words were needed. Because something had been restored. Not fame, but the belief that she was not walking this journey alone. A month later, the state government announced a fund called Restorative Innovation, the first fund dedicated to supporting founders who had been excluded from the system for non-technical reasons. Janelle declined financial support, but volunteered to serve on the selection committee. In the first list of applicants, one name made her pause. Carter Maddox, 17 years old. Project, a health data network for the homeless. She looked at the left-hand side of the application, where the technical advisor was listed, Cole Maddox, and underneath, a small line of text. Do not judge by legacy, judge by what we rebuild. On the official opening day of the family formula, there was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no live stream, just a wooden sign hanging at the entrance, engraved with Janelle's handwritten words. Recognition is not a reward. It's the minimum required for people to keep believing they matter. And that is how a woman who had once been erased from the very system she helped build quietly reshaped an entire tech industry. Not with revenge, but with memory, with community, and with something she called family. Have you ever felt like someone dismissed your worth? Have you ever wished that just one person believing in you could be enough? If this story inspired you, or made you angry about the injustice that still exists, or simply made you appreciate the quiet people who hold everything together, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because maybe your voice, your story, could be the family formula someone out there needs to believe in themselves again.